Have you ever wondered what happens when a woman with unparalleled intelligence, beauty, and charisma rises up to challenge the power structures of the ancient world? The story of Cleopatra VII, the last queen of Egypt, is a tale of ambition, passion, power, and endurance. At a time when Egypt was in its decline, Cleopatra was not just a monarch. She was an unstoppable force, capable of changing the course of history and challenging the most powerful empire of her time, Rome. The name Cleopatra conjures up images of wealth, mystery, and legendary beauty. However, his true power was not just in his looks, but in his strategic skill, his sharp intellect, and his uncanny ability to manipulate politics to ensure that his empire survived the rising tide of Roman power. The story of this woman begins long before her meeting with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. She was born in a tumultuous time, in 69 BC, during a period of instability in Egypt, one of the largest empires of antiquity. Cleopatra, at just 18 years old, found herself at the head of an empire on the verge of collapse. Her brother Ptolemy III, with whom she shared the throne, was manipulated by ambitious advisors, and soon she was forced to fight for her position. But the young queen was not intimidated. She went beyond the traditional policy of alliances and arranged marriages. Cleopatra used her wits and ability to negotiate with the greatest leaders of her day to ensure that Egypt would not be swallowed up by expansionist Rome. This woman, with her strategic vision, would make Egypt not only a power of the past, but a symbol of the struggle for survival. Cleopatra's rise to power is one of the most fascinating stories in ancient history. The young queen, at a time of great uncertainty for Egypt, had to use her cunning, beauty, and intelligence to overcome the chaos in which the empire found itself. His ability to rule was instrumental in ensuring that Egypt continued to exist and prosper for longer, even as the Roman Empire expanded, threatening the independence of all the nations around it. Alongside her brother, Cleopatra began a reign that seemed promising, but soon realized that Egypt's real power lay not in her formal position as queen, but in her ability to make bold decisions, often outside the norms. When her brother Ptolemy III betrayed her trust, Cleopatra was forced to flee to a region of Egypt where she would take refuge and begin a real struggle to regain her throne and her country. But Cleopatra did not fight alone. She knew that the power of Rome, with its great military strength, posed a direct threat to any attempt to rule Egypt independently. By making the bold decision to seek support from Rome, Cleopatra was endangering her life, but also her aspirations to keep Egypt free from foreign domination. She went beyond the options available to a queen of the time. Cleopatra saw beyond the local political struggle and understood that the future of her kingdom depended on her ability to win powerful allies. It was at this moment that she hatched a plan that would forever alter the trajectory of her life and Egypt. When Cleopatra met Julius Caesar, he was the most powerful man in Rome, and his strategic skill was known to all. The queen knew that to ensure her accession to the throne, she would need to do more than simple diplomatic negotiations. She knew she would need to impress him, captivate him, and somehow seal a pact that would ensure not only her survival, but also the future of her empire. So with courage and wisdom, she made a radical decision. During the meeting with Caesar, she presented herself in a way that no one would have ever imagined. Inside a rolled-up carpet, secretly sent to the palace of Rome. A dramatic arrival, but full of symbols, which made Caesar realize that Cleopatra was not a simple Egyptian ruler, but a woman of extraordinary intelligence and unwavering determination. This was just the beginning of an even more impressive story of alliances, betrayals, and conquests. Alongside Caesar, Cleopatra quickly regained her throne, but she knew there was still much more to be done. She needed to consolidate her power and ensure the security of Egypt. The real battle was just beginning. Cleopatra VII was not born to be a decorative figure on the throne of Egypt. On the contrary, she was a born leader with a sharp intelligence and impressive strategic skill. When her father, Ptolemy XIII, died in 51 BC, Cleopatra was appointed to rule alongside her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. Ptolemy XIII, still very young and vulnerable, fell into the hands of corrupt and ambitious advisors who saw Cleopatra as a threat to their own power. At the time, Egypt was in a situation of vulnerability. The Ptolemaic dynasty, though established several generations ago, was in decline, and the growing influence of Rome was creating a dangerous scenario for Egyptian independence. Roman leaders were eager to expand their territories, and Egypt, with its wealth and strategic location, was a prize they were not willing to lose. This external pressure and internal conflicts further weakened Egypt, which was divided between factions, and Cleopatra, from the beginning, realized that to stay in power, she would need more than a simple dynastic claim. She would need powerful allies and a strategy that would put her ahead of her enemies. The young queen did not hesitate to defy the norms of the time. Unlike many women of her class who saw themselves as limited to a traditional royal role, Cleopatra used her wits to achieve her goals. She quickly learned the value of diplomacy, but she also understood that her survival depended on her ability to manipulate the forces at play. The first move Cleopatra made was to ally herself with Rome, the largest empire at the time, but not in the conventional way. She knew that her destiny was tied to her ability to influence Roman leaders, and to do so, she would need more than just diplomatic negotiation. The turning point in her journey began when, in 48 BC, Cleopatra was forced to flee Alexandria, following her brother's betrayal and the growing threat from Rome. She did not back down in the face of adversity. Instead of surrendering, Cleopatra went to meet Julius Caesar, the Roman emperor, who at that time was in a battle to consolidate his absolute power over Rome. She didn't care about gender conventions or social norms. For her, conquering Caesar was more than a matter of personal safety. It was the key to Egypt's survival. Cleopatra did not make a simple visit to Rome or a discreet entrance into Caesar's palace. She did something audacious, and that would go down in history as one of the greatest political moves of all time. She is said to have entered the palace wrapped in a carpet, a metaphor for how she would enter history in unexpected and surprising ways. This action was a masterful move, for while it shocked, it also conveyed the message that Cleopatra was willing to go to any lengths to secure her position and that of Egypt. The carpet, a symbol of a discreet entrance, also represented a daring action marked by the queen's cunning and audacity. As soon as she was unraveled from the carpet, her presence was imposing, and her charisma quickly captured the attention of Julius Caesar. Caesar, who was already a powerful man, saw in Cleopatra not only a ruler, but a woman with an extraordinary vision for the future. He recognized in it the potential to establish an alliance that would benefit Rome while ensuring the preservation of Egypt. The alliance that formed between the two was strategic in nature, but also deeply personal. Cleopatra knew that by allying herself with Julius Caesar, she would ensure not only her ascension to the throne, but also the future of Egypt. However, this alliance was not without risk. It placed Cleopatra in a vulnerable position, as she would depend on Rome to consolidate her power. After this first meeting, Cleopatra was reinstated as Queen of Egypt. With Caesar's help, she defeated the forces that were against her and regained Alexandria. But Cleopatra was not content to just return to the throne. She knew she needed to cement herself as a central figure not only in Egypt, but also on the international stage. To do this, she needed to ensure that the alliance with Rome was sound and beneficial to both parties. Alongside Caesar, Cleopatra not only restored order in Egypt, but also strengthened her position in power. Together, they developed a series of economic and political reforms that helped stabilize Egypt after years of instability. Cleopatra used her political intelligence to build a network of support within Egypt and also among the Romans. Her ability to navigate the complex waters of international and domestic politics was instrumental in ensuring that she was one of the most powerful rulers of her time. The alliance between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar was not just a political union, it was one of the most defining moments in the history of Egypt and Rome. After Cleopatra's triumphant return to Alexandria with Caesar's support, Egypt began to experience an era of renewal and stability. However, the relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar went beyond the political sphere. It was also personal and deeply strategic for both sides. Cleopatra knew that Egypt's survival depended on her ability to secure Rome's protection, but also to maintain her autonomy as a ruler. The union of their destinies was a gamble that until that moment seemed risky, but which would soon bring great rewards. The first consequence of this alliance was a series of decisive victories for Cleopatra. She managed to stay in power and consolidate her position as sovereign, removing any possibility of internal destabilization. For Rome, the alliance with Egypt meant control of one of the richest and most influential regions of the ancient world, as well as ensuring that the region did not fall into the hands of enemy powers. Caesar, in turn, saw in Cleopatra a strategic ally who could provide him with resources and support in his own struggle for control of Rome. In 47 BC, Cleopatra and Caesar met again, this time in Rome, where she was officially recognized as Queen of Egypt. During her stay in the city, Cleopatra not only strengthened her alliance with Caesar, but also extended her influence in the Roman Empire. His visit to Rome was a smart political move, showing the strength of his leadership and his negotiating power. She presented herself as a modern queen, with a strong government and a clear vision for the future of Egypt and Rome. However, the most striking thing about this visit was the personal bond that was formed between the two leaders. Although Cleopatra was already a woman of great power, she knew that the relationship with Caesar could mean more than just political security. Their union generated a series of speculations in Rome, but it also opened doors for future negotiations and founded a powerful and, for a few years, unbreakable alliance. Cleopatra and Caesar became lovers, and in 47 BC, Cleopatra gave birth to a son of Caesar's, Ptolemy 15th Philopator Philomector Caesar, popularly known as Caesarion. This child, although never officially recognized as the heir of Rome, symbolized the union of two great powers. Cleopatra's presence in Rome and her relationship with Caesar also caused divisions in the Roman Empire. Many Romans saw the relationship as a challenge to Rome's authority, and this fueled rumors about Cleopatra's real interests. For many, his ascension to the throne and his alliance with Caesar were a way to ensure that Egypt remained free from growing Roman domination. For others, Cleopatra posed a threat to the status quo of the Roman Republic. Not only did Cleopatra use the power of Rome to her advantage, but she also made sure to keep Egypt in her own hand. In 46 BC, after Caesar's death, Cleopatra returned to Egypt with her son, Caesarion. She did not remain passive in her land, but rather worked relentlessly to ensure that Egypt remained sovereign despite the growing Roman influence on its borders. Egypt, now under the rule of the Ptolemaic dynasty, was at the center of a power struggle, not only within its own borders, but also among the emerging powers of Rome. The loss of Caesar meant the loss of a powerful ally for Cleopatra, But her intelligence and political skill were far from disappearing. She knew that her position in Egypt would only be secured if she managed to ally herself with another great figure in Rome. And so, in Rome's tumultuous political landscape, Cleopatra found a new ally. In 41 BC, she met Mark Antony, the Roman general who had assumed a dominant position after Caesar's death. Cleopatra and Mark Antony quickly allied themselves, both politically and personally, and this would mark the beginning of a new era of ambitions, alliances, and of course, great challenges for Egypt. Cleopatra's second union with a Roman, this time with Mark Antony, was not only an attempt to regain stability in Egypt, but also a strategic move to ensure that Egypt held its own on the international political stage. She knew that without the alliance with Rome, Egypt would not have the power it needed to resist the advances of other powers. After the death of Julius Caesar, the Roman Empire found itself in a scenario of intense internal power struggles. Rome, which had been a republic, was now under the leadership of several dominant figures, and what followed was a series of civil wars that would determine the future of the empire. In this turbulent context, Cleopatra, always attentive to political changes, found a new opportunity to consolidate her position and Egypt's independence. That opportunity came in the form of Mark Antony, one of Rome's most powerful generals, and an ally of Caesar. The alliance between Cleopatra and Mark Antony was not only a political union, but also a strategy to ensure Egypt's survival. Mark Antony, in turn, sought Cleopatra's support to strengthen his position against his political rivals in Rome, most notably Octavius, the future Emperor Caesar Augustus. Octavius and Mark Antony had been allies, but tensions between them increased, and soon Rome was divided into factions. By the time Cleopatra and Mark Antony met, he was in a battle for control of the Roman Empire, and Egypt, with its wealth and influence, was seen as a crucial ally. Cleopatra not only recognized the importance of this alliance, but also used it masterfully to strengthen her power. She allied herself with Mark Antony not only as a lover, but as a key figure in his struggle for power. The relationship between the two quickly became famous, both in Rome and Egypt, and their union was seen by many as an attempt to establish a new order in which Egypt and Rome were intertwined through an alliance of strength. With Cleopatra's support, Mark Antony was able to strengthen his position in the Roman Civil War. Together, they undertook several military campaigns with the aim of expanding their territories and increasing their influence. However, their relationship also began to fuel growing discontent among the Romans, particularly in Rome, where many viewed with suspicion the growing alliance with the foreign queen. The union of Cleopatra and Mark Antony was not only a military and strategic move, but also a cultural one. Cleopatra, with her intelligence and charm, seduced Mark Antony, who was completely enchanted by her. Together, they had 3 children, and Cleopatra used this motherhood as a way to further cement her alliance with Mark Antony. She, who had already been Caesarion's mother, now had the opportunity to create a dynasty that could ensure the continuity of Egyptian sovereignty. However, the romance and political union of Cleopatra and Mark Antony were not without complications. Support for Mark Antony in Rome was weakened by his relationship with Cleopatra, and many Romans saw this alliance as a sign of weakness. Octavius, Mark Antony's rival, used this to his advantage, spreading propaganda in Rome that Mark Antony had become a traitor, a man submissive to the whims of a foreign queen. The war of words and accusations that followed was intense, with Octavius painting Cleopatra as a villain who was manipulating Mark Antony for her own interests. He accused the Egyptian queen of trying to dominate Rome through her relationship with the Roman general. The propaganda of Octavius and his allies not only had a political impact, but also affected public opinion in Rome. Tensions rose, and soon words were turned into actions. Octavius decided to face Mark Antony in a decisive battle for supremacy over Rome and the empire. The battle that would define the future of both and, consequently, of Cleopatra and Egypt, would be fought at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. On the eve of the battle, Cleopatra and Mark Antony were fully committed to victory. Both knew that the fate of Egypt was at stake. However, the tide of war was not in their favor. The Roman fleet under Octavian managed to win, and the defeat at the Battle of Actium was a devastating blow to Cleopatra and Mark Antony. Cleopatra, who had always been a brilliant strategist, knew that military defeat meant the fall of her hopes for Egypt. After the defeat, Cleopatra and Mark Antony fled to Alexandria, where they attempted to reorganize their forces and resist the Roman invasion. However, Octavius was not long in coming, and the siege of Alexandria became inevitable. Egypt, which for centuries had been an independent power, was now at the mercy of the power of Rome. Cleopatra's downfall seemed imminent, and she knew that the fate of her kingdom was sealed. However, Cleopatra's story would not be defined by defeat alone. His life and legacy would continue to inspire generations, as his political skill, courage, and strategic vision would be recognized even after his death. Cleopatra and Mark Antony's final battle against the Roman Empire was marked by immense challenges. The Battle of Actium, fought in 31 BC, was a turning point, and the defeat by Octavius, the future emperor of Rome, marked the beginning of the end for independent Egypt. Unlike Rome, which had a strong army and immense resources, Cleopatra and Mark Antony faced serious difficulties, both in terms of military and political support. Cleopatra, known for her intelligence and diplomatic skill, found herself faced with a situation in which the chances of success were increasingly slim. However, she was not a woman who gave herself easily. Even after the defeat of her allies, she tried in every way to preserve what was left of her kingdom, but Octavian's threat grew by the day. He knew that the Roman Empire would spare no effort to conquer Egypt, and that his position was increasingly untenable. The situation became even more desperate when Mark Antony, devastated by defeat and the loss of his position, made a tragic decision. Although some historical sources mention the possibility that he chose to take his own life, the fact remains that his death meant the disintegration of the last stand against Rome in Egypt. Now, Cleopatra was alone, with her city nearing being taken by Octavian's forces. With the imminent fall of Alexandria, Cleopatra found herself with no options. She knew that if she was captured, she would be taken to Rome as a prisoner, exposed to public humiliation and the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for centuries. His great political skill had allowed him to deal with several adversities during his life, but now the future seemed without alternatives. The Egyptian queen, in a last act of control over her destiny, opted for a dignified death rather than being taken prisoner. This tragic moment marked not only the end of Egypt as an independent power, but also the loss of one of the most iconic figures in ancient history. The way Cleopatra chose to end her life has generated many speculations over the centuries. Although precise details are difficult to confirm, it is believed that she retreated to safety where, in the company of her closest allies, she made the choice to depart from this life. Her death was not only the end of a great queen, but also the end point of an important chapter in the history of Egypt and the ancient world. With his death, Egypt was finally absorbed into the Roman Empire. Octavius, now with the title of Caesar Augustus, consolidated his power, and Egypt became a province of Rome. The Ptolemaic dynasty, which had ruled Egypt for centuries, was coming to an end. The Egyptian queen, who had been one of the most powerful and complex figures of her time, now became a mythical figure, an icon of history that transcended her own time. Cleopatra's legacy, however, was not erased with her death. Her intelligence, her cunning, and her ability to keep Egypt independent for so long amid political and military pressures have turned her into a symbol of female power and leadership. She defied the standards of her time and left a lasting impact on history. Over the centuries, Cleopatra has been portrayed in many forms. She was seen as a woman of great beauty and charm, but also as a strategist and political leader. Its history, with its alliances, its battles, and its determination, has become a source of inspiration for many generations. Today, as we look back on her life and achievements, we can reflect on what she left us as a lesson. The importance of fighting for what we believe in, the courage to face adversity, and the ability to navigate complex networks of power, always with a strategic and attentive eye. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, remains one of the most fascinating and influential figures in history. Despite her tragic death, Cleopatra's legacy spanned centuries, making it one of the most fascinating and discussed chapters in ancient history. His name echoes to this day, and his image remains one of the most powerful in the collective imagination. She was not only a queen, but also a woman who managed to defy the norms of the time, forge strategic alliances, and show the world the power of female leadership. Even with Egypt under the rule of Rome, Cleopatra remained a legendary figure, revered for her intelligence and political skills, but also for her ability to inspire those around her. Cleopatra represented something unique in a male-dominated world, a woman who did not conform to the limits imposed by society and who used her position to shape the destiny of her kingdom and her civilization. At a time when women rarely held positions of power, she stood out as a leader of great influence, able to seduce, convince, and negotiate with powerful figures of her day, including the most influential leaders in Rome, such as Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. His ability to command not only his kingdom, but also to negotiate with major outside powers, such as Rome, is something that cannot be underestimated. She used her intelligence and cunning to protect Egypt and its people, always seeking to ensure the independence of her homeland. Cleopatra was also a woman of great culture and education. Not only did she master multiple languages, but she was also an unbeatable political strategist who knew how to use diplomacy, wits, and influence to ensure the survival of her empire over the centuries. Cleopatra has become an admired and, at the same time, misunderstood figure. Her name was often associated with the idea of a seductive woman, but her real strength lay in her political skill and the way she knew how to use her position for the survival of her kingdom. She was not just a mistress or a queen seeking personal power, but a leader who put the interests of her country and its people above all else. In modern times, Cleopatra continues to be a studied, debated, and celebrated figure. Her story has become a powerful metaphor for women who seek to break down barriers and fight for what they believe in, even when they are surrounded by immense challenges. The figure of Cleopatra is often reinterpreted in different cultural contexts, but the core of her story remains the same. A woman who defied expectations, who used her wits and cunning to fight for freedom and independence, and who, although she faced a tragic fate, never lost her dignity. His life, marked by victories and defeats, by alliances and betrayals, by loves and losses, continues to be an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Cleopatra teaches us that no matter how great the power or the adversity in front of us, we can always find ways to stand out, fight for what we believe in, and make our mark on the world. In addition to her political skill, Cleopatra was also a woman of great sensitivity. She cared deeply about her people and the issues surrounding the well-being of her land. His emotional intelligence, which combined a keen sense of leadership with a deep understanding of human feelings, allowed him not only to govern, but also to connect with those around him. This connection between heart and reason was one of the great secrets of his success. As time passes, the image of Cleopatra transforms into something more complex and multifaceted. She's no longer just a queen of Egypt. She's now a symbol of strength, intelligence, leadership, and courage. Its history inspires not only scholars of ancient history, but also all those who, regardless of their gender, color, or origin, seek to overcome obstacles and change the course of history. Cleopatra was one of the last great monarchs of Egypt, but her legacy is eternal. Never mind that Egypt was annexed to the Roman Empire. She remains a central figure in world history, remembered for her ability to defy expectations and for her ability to resist until the last moment, a fate that seemed already decided. She has become an icon of perseverance, symbolizing the struggle against oppression and the search for justice and freedom. Cleopatra, with her extraordinary ability to rule and her unforgettable presence, proved to the world that a woman's power is not limited to the stereotypes of her time. His legacy of endurance and wisdom will be remembered for many future generations. The story of Cleopatra has been told in many ways over the centuries, and her image has morphed into a myth that transcends the barriers of time and culture. She was portrayed as a woman of unparalleled beauty, but also as an astute and charismatic leader who, through her intelligence and charm, managed to hold her own in power during extremely challenging times. His story, full of intrigue, passion, and tragedy, has become a cultural icon that has inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers throughout history. Cleopatra was one of the most portrayed figures in literary and artistic works from ancient times to the present. In many depictions, she is seen as the femme fatale who seduced powerful Roman leaders such as Julius Caesar and Mark Antony to ensure Egypt's survival. However, this interpretation, while part of the story, does not fully capture the complexity of his personality and his historical role. Cleopatra was not just a woman who used her beauty to attract powerful men, but rather a clever ruler who used her political skills to protect Egypt from the threat of Rome. The figure of Cleopatra in popular culture is often a reflection of the norms and expectations of each era. During the era of the Roman Empire, the image of Cleopatra as a seductress and manipulator was widely promoted by the enemies of her dynasty, particularly by those who saw her alliances with Roman leaders as threats to Rome's sovereignty. This contributed to the construction of a narrative that devalued her abilities as a ruler and portrayed her in a negative light. However, over the centuries, the figure of Cleopatra has been resignified, especially in modern times. Artists and filmmakers began to portray her in a more complex and multifaceted way. Cleopatra came to be seen not only as a woman involved in romantic intrigues, but also as a political strategist, a military leader, and a charismatic figure who wielded considerable power in a male-dominated age. More recent depictions of Cleopatra, especially in film, often emphasize her courage, intelligence, and diplomatic skills. Films such as Cleopatra, 1963, starring Elizabeth Taylor, helped to solidify Cleopatra's image as a woman of great power and influence, who used her intelligence and strategic skills to secure the position of her empire. In addition, Cleopatra has also become a central figure in many artistic depictions. Painters and sculptors over the centuries have depicted her in various ways, often exploiting her physical appearance as a reflection of her seduction and power. However, as historical studies on Cleopatra deepened, her image became more complex and closer to historical reality. A woman who defied the expectations of the society of her time and used her position to fight for Egypt's survival. In the literary field, Cleopatra was also portrayed in different ways. Poets and writers from the Roman period to modern times have written about her, reflecting on her life and her choices. Many focused on his relationship with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, while others explored the political implications of his actions. His story has been used as a metaphor for the struggle for power, love, betrayal, and sacrifice, universal themes that continue to resonate with contemporary audiences. In some versions of the story, Cleopatra was portrayed as a tragic heroine whose quest for power led her to an inevitable fate. This view of history often focuses on Cleopatra's struggle to preserve Egypt's independence and her ability to resist growing Roman domination. In other depictions, she is seen as a figure of resistance who, even in the face of adversity, maintained her dignity and control over her destiny. However, it is important to remember that the figure of Cleopatra, both in history and popular culture, is often a complex construction. While she was a powerful woman, the way her story has been told and retold over time doesn't always accurately reflect the details of her life. The popular narrative of Cleopatra as the seductive and manipulative woman obscures many of the qualities that made her an exceptional leader. His true strength lay not only in his ability to attract powerful men, but in his ability to govern wisely, face immense challenges, and forge strategic alliances for the good of his people. In addition, the perpetuation of the myth of Cleopatra as a figure of unparalleled physical beauty often obscures the importance of her intellectual and political qualities. She was not only a beautiful woman, but a queen capable of making difficult decisions and leading an empire at the height of its political complexity. The Cleopatra of the story was a woman who used her sharp mind to ensure the survival of her civilization, and not just her image in power. Today, the figure of Cleopatra remains one of the most fascinating and controversial in history. She represents a woman who defied her time, who fought until the last moment for the independence of her land, and who, even in the face of an impossible destiny, made her choice with dignity. Cleopatra's story is still a rich source of reflection on power, love, politics, and resistance, themes that continue to inspire and challenge current generations. After the defeat in the battles of Actium against Octavian, Cleopatra and Mark Antony saw their kingdom, Egypt, succumb to the growing threat of the Roman Empire. The defeat was devastating, but the Egyptian queen, as always, tried to maintain the dignity of her kingdom. Throughout her life, Cleopatra had been a resilient leader, facing internal political crises and external challenges. Her diplomatic skill and intelligence made her one of the most notable figures in ancient history. With the loss of Mark Antony, her greatest ally and lover, and the inevitable defeat by Rome, Cleopatra found herself facing a future with no prospects. Egypt was about to be absorbed into the Roman Empire, and with it, its independence would fade. The Roman Empire was on the rise, and Cleopatra made a drastic choice not to allow herself and her country to fall into the hands of Rome, being led into humiliation and captivity. The Egyptian queen knew that her fight to keep Egypt independent no longer had a chance of victory. Thus, she made the painful choice to withdraw from the political scene and to govern, adopting a more peaceful destiny for herself and her people. Cleopatra therefore made a solitary decision that involved her own destiny, but with the awareness that she was trying to protect Egyptian legacy and culture. With the siege of Alexandria underway, the Egyptian capital being taken by the Romans, Cleopatra retreated to her palace, where she faced the last moments of her life. Many accounts of the time describe his state of mind as one of deep sadness and melancholy, given the reality that his kingdom would no longer be autonomous. She knew that most of her life of political and personal battles had come to an end. For a long time, the exact circumstances of his death were surrounded by mystery and speculation. Although many accounts from the time mention the presence of a snake traditionally associated with Cleopatra, historical truth remains uncertain. What we do know is that the Egyptian queen decided not to submit to the fate of being captured and humiliated before Octavius and the Roman Empire. Cleopatra's death, like many important historical figures, sparked debates about her choice. Whether her death was the result of poison or another type of intervention, the fact is that Cleopatra withdrew from the political scene and the world in a remarkable way. For her, perhaps, his death was a way to preserve her dignity and the culture of an Egypt she loved deeply. Egypt, after his death, was de facto absorbed by the Roman Empire, which transformed it into a province. The ancient Egyptian Empire, with its rich history, its grandiose buildings, and its millennial traditions, became part of the vast empire of Rome. Cleopatra's memory, however, has never been erased. She would continue to be remembered as one of the most powerful and intelligent women in ancient history. Her name would become synonymous with strength, female leadership, and someone who, even in the face of defeat, did not give up easily. Over the centuries, Cleopatra has been immortalized in literature, film, and art, and her legacy has continued to inspire generations. His death did not mean the end of his influence. Egypt, as a culturally rich and important region, would continue to influence the Roman world in a variety of ways. However, Egypt would never again be an autonomous power as it was during the times of Cleopatra, its last great queen. The story of Cleopatra, her reign and her death, remains one of the most fascinating in ancient history, a reminder of how politics, war, and personal choices can shape the fate of an empire and a person. Despite her tragic death and the end of Ptolemaic Egypt, Cleopatra left a legacy that endures to this day. His figure, marked by intelligence, diplomatic skill, and courage, became a cultural icon, not only in antiquity, but also in the history of humanity as a whole. The impact of his reign was immense and extended beyond his death, profoundly affecting the Roman Empire and the Mediterranean world. Cleopatra's story has always been marked by her ability to articulate powerful alliances. She knew that her kingdom needed strong allies to survive in a world dominated by Rome. His alliances with Julius Caesar and later with Mark Antony were instrumental in not only maintaining his position in power, but also in ensuring the protection of Egypt. Even in the face of the growing threat from Octavius, the future Roman emperor, Cleopatra fought tirelessly to preserve her country's independence. Her ability to use her political intelligence and persuasion, coupled with her charming figure, is what kept her as a powerful leader for so long. However, Cleopatra's legacy goes beyond political alliances. She's also remembered for her role as an advocate for Egyptian culture. During her reign, she restored many of Egypt's religious traditions and practices, promoting the worship of Egyptian gods and reinforcing national identity. She was also a great patron of the arts and education, seeking to preserve and expand knowledge of Egyptian civilization. Her love for Egypt and her dedication to the country became key parts of her historical image, and even her name, Cleopatra, meaning glory of the father, symbolized her connection to the ancient land of the pharaohs. With the death of Cleopatra and the absorption of Egypt into the Roman Empire, the greatness of Egyptian civilization was transformed. Egypt, although it never regained its independence, continued to be a land of great cultural and historical importance. Roman rule over Egypt brought with it a mixture of cultural influences, and the region became an important center of trade and learning within the Roman Empire. However, the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty meant the loss of a symbol of resistance to foreign domination, a symbol that Cleopatra embodied. Cleopatra's impact on Roman history cannot be underestimated either. Her relationship with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony made her a well-known and respected figure in Rome. She was one of the most powerful women to have lived, and her presence in Roman history sparked discussions about the role of women in politics and warfare. However, her death also marked the end of an era of powerful queens in the Hellenistic world and the beginning of the rise of the Roman Empire, which in many ways would consolidate male power in Rome, unlike the Hellenistic dynasties that allowed for female power. Cleopatra was also one of the most portrayed women in Western culture. Since antiquity, his figure has been reinvented in literature, theater, and cinema. The image of Cleopatra as a seductive, intelligent, and powerful woman has been explored in many productions over the centuries, such as in William Shakespeare's famous play, Antony and Cleopatra. Her life has also been immortalized in numerous artistic representations, and her figure has been used as a symbol of female power, despite the controversies and stereotypes associated with her figure. In modern times, Cleopatra continues to be a fascinating figure, being depicted in films, books, and even academic studies. She is seen not only as a seductive queen, but as a strategic leader who used her wits to try to save her kingdom and protect her culture. His death, although tragic, did not erase his importance in history. Instead, it became a symbol of resistance, of the struggle for independence, and of preserving the culture of an ancient civilization. Cleopatra's legacy goes beyond her death and the end of Egypt as an independent power. His influence on the Roman world and on Western culture remains a fascinating topic, with numerous interpretations of his life, his choices, and his motivations. Today, Cleopatra is remembered not only as a queen, but as a woman who defied the expectations of her time and became one of the most iconic figures in world history. Cleopatra, the last great pharaoh of Egypt, not only marked her era with her political skill and her audacious decisions, but also left a deep mark on the future. His strategic intelligence, his courage in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges, and his unconditional love for his homeland are aspects that still resonate in the following generations. In a world dominated by war, conquest, and the pursuit of power, Cleopatra stood out as a woman of unparalleled wisdom who never let herself be reduced to her circumstances. She has never shied away from her mission to protect Egypt, and her life reveals an inner strength capable of defying empires. Even when faced with defeat, her dignity remained intact, and her desire to preserve her culture and her people drove her until the last moment. However, Cleopatra's legacy is not just in her victories or defeats. It is in the way she faced life's greatest challenges, maintaining her essence, her dignity, and her courage, even when there seemed to be no more hope. It teaches us that no matter how difficult the journey may be, dignity and faith in what we are and what we can achieve should never be lost. Just as Cleopatra did not let herself be discouraged these days, we can all learn from her resilience. The world can be a place of challenges and difficulties, but with faith, courage, and the belief that our journey has a purpose, we can find light in even the darkest of times. If you, like Cleopatra, find yourself facing difficulties or moments of uncertainty, remember that true strength comes from within. When we look at the past, we see figures like her who faced adversity without losing hope. And just like Cleopatra, we too can leave our mark on the world, no matter how small or large our actions. Now, if you were inspired by this story of courage and persistence, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Here you'll find more accounts of personalities who changed the course of history, people who, like Cleopatra, transformed the world through their faith, intelligence, and determination. Sign up now and continue the journey with us. Be sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos that bring more inspiration and learning.